I'd like to start today by talking about something that's very much in the zeitgeist. Simply type Bush Hitler into the Google, and you'll find numerous, in fact over 2 million references connecting the two. Perhaps even more revealingly, type Bush Hitler into the Google image search, and you'll find countless artistic takes on the idea that Bush and Hitler are not so different as it might at first glance appear. As I say, this is very much part of the zeitgeist, and the politically informed amongst us know that Hitler ordered the burning of the Reichstag in 1933 in order to secure a consolidation of power which would eventually make him dictator, and George W. Bush was complicit in the 9/11 attacks, which is the consolidation of power for the neocons in government at the moment, as they extend their grip across the globe. There are numerous articles, speeches, and documentaries available online drawing out the similarities between 1930s Nazi Germany and living in America in the present age. And as much as the dwindling neocon support base would like you to believe, this is not the work of wild-eyed leftist nuts, but has even surfaced in extremely mainstream places. To demonstrate this fact, I'd like to turn to a clip from Wolf Blitzer's Situation Room on CNN, in which he interviewed George Soros. George Soros was of course born in Hungary, escaping Nazi persecution by fleeing first to England and eventually to the United States, where he became known for his Soros Fund Management, which was enormously successful and has made him a very wealthy man indeed. In this clip from Wolf Blitzer's Situation Room, Blitzer brings up a quote from a recent book by Mr. Soros, which compares the Bush regime to the Nazis and the communists and other dictatorial societies. Let's turn to that clip from CNN's Situation Room.
And one of the world's wealthiest men has written a book with comments very, very critical of the Bush administration. Let's talk about your new book, The Age of Fallibility, Consequences of the War on Terror. I want to read to you a quote that sort of startled me, I'm sure a lot of your readers, once they read it. The Bush administration and the Nazi and communist regimes all engaged in the politics of fear. Indeed, the Bush administration has been able to improve on the technique used by the Nazi and communist propaganda machines by drawing on the innovations of the advertising and marketing industries. Now, when a lot of people hear comparisons between President Bush and Nazis and communists, they're going to say, George Soros, you've gone over the top.
You actually picked up the most incendiary part of the book, and I am very careful to draw a clear distinction between the Nazi regime and our open society, because we are a democracy. But there are some similarities in the propaganda methods which I pointed out.
But George Soros, you lived through the Holocaust.
Yes.
You know firsthand what the Nazis were doing. You lived through the Cold War, the worst of the Stalinist era. To make comparisons between the President of the United States and these regimes, a lot of people are going to say, what are you thinking?
Well, that is unfortunate, because I think there are some serious arguments about our open society being endangered by the policies followed by the Bush administration. The war on terror, which does not have an end, changes. It leads to an undue extension of executive powers. It has stifled debate, criticizing the president. This is considered unpatriotic. And as a result, we have been following policies which endanger our position.
A lot of people will agree with you on that. Yes. But where they will starkly disagree is to then bring in the whole Nazi and communist comparison.
You are actually, it's a valid point. And maybe I did go over the line, but I think that on the whole, my assessment is a balanced one. And the fact, frankly, when President Bush said, you are either with us or you are with the terrorists, that's when I was reminded. But I should have probably kept it to myself.
You're either with us or you're with the terrorists. Yeah, that's a good point. Where have I heard that before? Oh, yeah.
I have brought peace, freedom, justice and security to my new empire.
Your new empire?
Don't make me kill you.
Anakin, my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy!
If you're not with me, then you're my enemy.
Only a Sith deals in absolutes. I will do what I must.
You will try.
All kidding aside, make of the George Bush-Darth Vader connection what you will. And incidentally, the Corbett Report will have more to say on that in the coming weeks and months. But I hope that CNN clip at least demonstrates that the Bush regime, Hitler regime link is firmly established in the collective consciousness. As usual today, that is not enough for the Corbett Report. I am here today to tell you that the links between the Bushes and the Nazis of 1930s Germany, in fact, go much deeper than that. I'd like to turn to the most mainstream of mainstream news sources, the fair and balanced Fox News, for this story. And here's a Fox News story that actually I agree with. Here's the headline from this Friday, October 17th, 2003 AP story available on foxnews.com. Documents. Bush's grandfather directed bank tied to man who funded Hitler. The article reads in part, quote, President Bush's grandfather was a director of a bank seized by the federal government because of its ties to a German industrialist who helped bankroll Adolf Hitler's rise to power, government documents show. Prescott Bush was one of 7 directors of Union Banking Corp., a New York investment bank owned by a bank controlled by the Thiessen family, according to recently declassified National Archives documents reviewed by the Associated Press. Fritz Thiessen was an early financial supporter of Hitler, whose Nazi party Thiessen believed was preferable to communism. End quote. The article goes on to detail how Union Banking was seized by the government in 1942 under the Trading with the Enemy Act, and if it weren't for lack of resources, due to the fact that America was at war at the time, Prescott Bush quite likely could have been convicted of treason. Instead, he got off scot-free to continue his political career, and we all know what happened with his progeny. This is a fascinating story, and it was broken by Webster Tarpley in a book he co-wrote in 1992, The Unauthorized Biography of George W. Bush. And again, that book is available online for free at tarpley.net, and I highly suggest you go and check that book out. But the story was re-broken, as it were, by John Buchanan in 2003. Mr. Buchanan was interviewed by Alex Jones for his 2005 documentary Martial Law 9/11: Rise of the Police State. Let's turn to a clip from that interview in which Mr. Buchanan details his quest to get to the bottom of the Prescott Bush Union Banking Corp. Nazi Party triangle.
I've been an investigative reporter and a journalist for 35 years. I've worked in every major media market in the United States, and I've written for more than 100 newspapers and magazines nationally and internationally. So last September 17th, I became the first journalist in U.S. history to go to the U.S. National Archives and the Library of Congress and pore over the thousands of pages of documents in both places to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt or any refutation of the facts that Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George W. Bush, and George Herbert Walker, his maternal great-grandfather for whom his daddy is named, were Nazi traitors to the country who should have been tried for treason. 2 weeks ago, in early August, a major world newspaper, The Guardian of London, finally got on the story internationally, and they flew a renowned reporter of theirs named Duncan Campbell over to Washington to take me back to the archives and Library of Congress so that they could verify that these explosive documents were real and I didn't have forged copies. Prescott Bush was the grandfather of George W. Bush and the father of George Herbert Walker Bush, and George Herbert Walker Bush is named for his father-in-law, George Herbert Walker. Prescott Bush graduated from Yale in 1917 and was in Skull and Bones with E. Roland Harriman, who was the younger brother of W. Averill Harriman. The Bush family really had nothing going. They were essentially social climbers and opportunistic people. At the time that Prescott Bush met Dorothy Walker, he was a tire salesman. And George Herbert Walker, as all fathers do when their daughter's going to marry someone, said in his heart, you know, it's not an appropriate thing socially that my daughter marry a tire salesman. So he brought Prescott Bush first into Brown Brothers Harriman and then Union Banking Corporation. In actuality, it was anything but a bank. It was essentially a Nazi money laundering operation that had a lot of tentacles into a lot of different other businesses. They owned a shipping line called Hamburg American Line, for example, which was the first Nazi front business seized, although the line was no longer operational in 1942. In the early 1930s, it transported Nazi spies into the U.S., and then their promotional ads offered cash rewards to any American citizens who would go back on Hamburg American lines and proselytize for Hitler. 8 months after the U.S. had entered the war, the New York Herald Tribune ran a front-page article, "Hitler's Angel has $3 million in U.S. bank." And it caused a major scandal and just rocked the world of politics. Brown Brothers Harriman, which George Herbert Walker and Prescott Bush were affiliated with and partners in, worked with I.G. Farben, which operated Auschwitz. Prescott Bush, he did a number of things that were not only anti-American but were pro-Hitler, and he did all that he could to proselytize for Hitler and the rise of his Third Reich, because the largest client, Fritz Thiessen, of his patron, W. Averill Harriman, dictated what kind of behavior he would practice to enhance his own career. So he was put on the board of directors of Union Banking Corporation, and he was also a shareholder in Union Banking Corporation along with E. Roland Harriman. But what's interesting about what the documents show is that they clearly state that all of the shareholders were phantom shareholders for Fritz Thiessen and did his bidding directly. So the point I'm making is it's not as if they bought these shares of stock as a passive investment to hopefully profit from the war. They were directly doing the bidding of the individual who built the Nazi war machine. Some very shocking documents that I saw at the Library of Congress 2 weeks ago on August 10th. On August 9th, excuse me, had to do with the hearings of the McCormick-Dickstein Committee of November 1934, show that Prescott Bush and the DuPont family, the Remington family, and J.P. Morgan tried to overthrow the U.S. government, assassinate FDR, and put a Hitler-style fascist state in place. I have in my possession testimony from the McCormick-Dickstein Committee in November of 1934 by one of the fascist plotters that they were going to follow Hitler's model exactly and impose martial law on the United States, round up unemployed people that were worthless to the economy and troublemakers and Jews and put them into internment camps. And their plan was, if necessary, to exterminate the people that could not be part of the effort. The only reason the coup attempt in 1934 didn't succeed is that they hired the wrong general to lead it, General Smedley Butler, the great Marine hero, two-time Congressional Medal of Honor winner, who worked with the plotters just long enough to be able to identify who they were and then blew the whistle on them to Congress. Incredibly, after being warned by the FBI and the Justice Department and the Treasury Department to cease and desist in their Nazi dealings, they had continued them until 1951. There had been 28 additional seizures of Nazi assets and Nazi business fronts between late 1942 and 1951, and that they had moved Nazi assets into Switzerland, Brazil, Argentina, and Panama, and they had continued to do business with their primary Nazi patron, who was Fritz Thiessen, who backed Hitler beginning in 1921 and who was the wealthiest man in Germany, and a steel and coal baron who, with his partner Friedrich Flick, essentially built the Nazi war machine along with I.G. Farben. In 1951, when Fritz Thiessen died in Argentina, Union Banking Corporation was liquidated by the U.S. government, and Prescott Bush received $1.5 million for his holdings in his Nazi business, and that was the beginning of the Bush family fortune for all intents and purposes.